4,000 years before anyone dreamed of engines, a single animal defined the speed of human life: the horse. Domesticated around 4000 BC in the grasslands of Central Asia, probably by the bowtie culture in what is now Kazakhstan, it became the fastest thing a person could own. Armies rose and fell on the back of it. Empires were measured by how many of them a king could feed. Trade routes, mail routes, post roads, battlefield orders, royal couriers, farming, plowing, hauling, traveling, fleeing, all of it moved at the pace of 4 hooves on dirt. Before the horse, humans had the donkey and the ox. Neither could run. The ox pulled the plow at 3 kilometers per hour. The donkey carried the load at roughly the same pace. A man on foot could cover about 30 kilometers in a day if the weather held and the terrain was flat. That was the ceiling. The world, as far as any ancient civilization could reach it, measured about 30 kilometers per day. The horse tripled that number, then doubled it again once the chariot arrived. By 2000 BC, the Sumerians had hitched the horse to a cart and called it a chariot. By 1500 BC, the Egyptians were chasing enemies across the desert with 6-spoked wheels behind 2 animals pulling at full gallop. By the Roman Empire, horses carried mail across thousands of kilometers of stone roads. By the Middle Ages, knights built entire castles around stables. By the 18th century, the stagecoach was the fastest public transport in the world. By the 19th, horse-drawn trams filled the streets of London, Paris, New York, and Berlin. For 40 centuries, the fastest land vehicle on Earth was a horse. That was the ceiling. Nobody had ever gone faster without one. Nobody had ever moved without waiting for the animal to rest, to eat, to sleep, to be replaced. A man who wanted to travel 100 kilometers needed a fresh horse every 20. A postal service needed stables every stage. A farmer needed a stable, a feed crop, a blacksmith, a harness maker, and an entire rural economy just to own the beast that pulled his plow. This was not a lifestyle. It was a civilization, 4,000 years of it, built on oats, hay, hooves, and the patience of men who had never seen anything move faster than flesh. Consider what this meant practically. In the year 1800, the population of London was roughly 1 million people. Moving that city required an estimated 50,000 horses every single day. Each horse ate around 10 kilograms of hay and grain. Each horse produced roughly 15 kilograms of manure. 50,000 horses meant 500 tons of hay consumed per day and 750 tons of manure left behind in the streets. A city like New York by the late 19th century had a population of around 2 million humans and roughly 100,000 working horses. The manure piled up on corners and literal mountains. Flies bred in clouds. The smell in summer was suffocating. Dead horses, too heavy to move quickly, were sometimes left on the streets until they decomposed enough to be hauled away in pieces. This was the cost of the horse economy. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. An actual daily infrastructure of feed, stables, blacksmiths, harness makers, manure collectors, ostlers, wheelwrights, and veterinarians. Every human settlement above a certain size was, in effect, a secondary horse settlement. The city existed because the horses did. Take away the horses, and nobody could deliver bread, coal, mail, or milk. Take away the horses, and the whole apparatus stopped. That was the world Gottlieb Daimler was born into in 1834. A world where the horse was not a luxury or a hobby. It was the load-bearing animal of the entire industrial civilization. Then, one man in a converted greenhouse in southern Germany built something that did not need to eat. It did not need to sleep. It did not need to be replaced. It ran on a liquid that people bought in pharmacies to clean stains off their clothes. And when he was done, the horse was finished. His name was Gottlieb Daimler. He was not a nobleman. He was not an industrialist. He was not a man of wealth or inheritance or aristocratic connection. He was the son of a baker. Gottlieb Wilhelm Daimler was born on March 17, 1834, in the small town of Schorndorf, roughly 30 kilometers east of Stuttgart, in what was then the Kingdom of Württemberg. The house he was born in had belonged to his grandfather, purchased in 2 installments in 1787 and 1806. His father, Johannes Daimler, was a master baker and innkeeper. His mother, Friederike, kept the family home. There was no workshop in the house, there was no machinery, there was a bakery, bread ovens, and the smell of flour. From the time he could walk, Gottlieb was surrounded by the rhythm of manual craft. His father worked with his hands. His grandfather had worked with his hands. The boy was expected to do the same, eventually, in some respectable trade. A baker's son in that part of Germany had a narrow set of futures. He could inherit the bakery. He could take a civil service job. He could become a municipal employee like his father quietly hoped. The idea of inventing anything, of building machines, of shaping history, did not belong to a boy born in the upstairs rooms of a bakery in a small Swabian town. But Gottlieb was not interested in bread. By age 13, he had completed 6 years of primary school at the local Lateinschule, and he was spending his Sundays in extra drawing classes. He could already see the shapes of machines in his head before he knew what they were called. In 1847, at 13, his teachers noticed. In 1848, the year of revolutions across Europe, the year Germany burned with political fever, Gottlieb turned 14 and became an apprentice, not to a baker, not to a civil servant, to a gunsmith. His master was a man named Hermann Rethel. Gunsmithing in 1848 was precision work at the edge of what was technically possible. A gunsmith filed, drilled, and fitted components to tolerances of fractions of a millimeter. He worked with exploding forces. He understood metal, stress, heat, and timing. For 4 years, Gottlieb learned to make things that had to function under violent conditions, or they killed the people holding them. When he passed his journeyman's examination in 1852, at 18 years old, his final project was a pair of engraved double-barreled pistols. He had mastered the craft, and then he walked away from it. Gunsmithing was a dead end. Germany was industrializing. Steam was replacing muscle in factories across Europe. The future was not in handmade firearms. It was in machines that moved on their own. In 1852, Gottlieb enrolled at Stuttgart School for Advanced Training in the Industrial Arts, where he came under the tutelage of Ferdinand Steinbeiß, a state official responsible for industrial education in Württemberg. Steinbeiß recognized something in the baker's son from Schorndorf. He arranged for Gottlieb to spend 4 years, starting in 1853, working at an engineering firm in Grafenstaden, in the Alsace region of France. The boy was 19 years old. He had already left his hometown. Now he was leaving his country. For 4 years, Gottlieb worked in the Alsatian machine shop by day and studied theoretical engineering by night. His performance was exceptional. When he returned to Stuttgart and enrolled at the Polytechnic Institute, his grades were so high he was allowed to skip the first 2 years of the engineering course and was exempted from tuition fees. He studied steam engines, physics, chemistry, mechanical engineering, English, and economics. He graduated ready to build a life around machinery. In 1860, at 26, he moved to Paris to work at the Perrin-Band saw factory. For 2 years, from 1861 to the end of 1862, he traveled through England and visited the heart of the British Industrial Revolution: Oldham, Leeds, Manchester, Coventry. He walked through locomotive factories, machine tool plants, and workshops where steam had already replaced the human arm in half the tasks of manufacturing. He was memorizing what was possible. He came back to Germany in 1863 and took a job as a draftsman at a metalworking firm in Geislingen that would later become WMF. Within a year, in December 1863, he was offered the position of workshop inspector at a charitable institution called the Bruderhaus in Reutlingen. The Bruderhaus was an orphanage and workshop that trained poor boys in mechanical trades. It was there, in 1864, that Gottlieb Daimler met a 19-year-old orphan named Wilhelm Maybach. That meeting changed the history of transportation. Maybach was 12 years younger than Daimler. He had been an orphan since childhood, raised inside the Bruderhaus itself, working in its machine shop. He was a natural designer. Where Daimler thought in systems and business, Maybach thought in mechanisms and geometry. Daimler saw the problem. Maybach saw the part that solved it. From that year forward, for the next 36 years, Maybach would follow Gottlieb Daimler into every project, every factory, every workshop, every fight with every investor. They would build the modern engine together. Neither one of them could have done it alone. In 1867, Daimler married Emma Kurtz, the daughter of a pharmacist from Maulbronn. They would have 5 children. In 1869, Gottlieb was appointed factory director at the Maschinenbaugesellschaft Karlsruhe, a heavy engineering firm. Maybach followed him as technical designer. 3 years later, in 1872, a bigger opportunity came. A company in Cologne called Gasmotoren Fabrik Deutz, half owned by a man named Nicholas August Otto, needed a new technical director. Deutz was the largest manufacturer of stationary gas engines in the world. Daimler was offered the job. Maybach came with him as chief designer. Nicholas Otto was 4 years older than Daimler and already famous in engineering circles. He had been working since the 1860s on a problem that had defeated every engineer who touched it: how to make a gas-fueled internal combustion engine that actually worked. Etienne Lenoir in France had built a working model in 1860, but it was inefficient, slow, and practically useless outside of pumping water or running machinery in a fixed workshop. Otto wanted something better. In 1876, after 14 years of effort, Otto and his partner, Eugen Langen, patented the 4-stroke cycle engine: intake, compression, power, exhaust. The 4 strokes of every gasoline engine on Earth today still follow Otto's pattern. It was a real breakthrough, but it had a ceiling. Otto's engine ran at 150 to 200 revolutions per minute on coal gas piped in from a municipal supply. It was designed to replace steam engines inside factories. It was a heavy, slow, stationary machine. Otto had no interest in taking it anywhere. As far as he was concerned, the engine belonged in the factory. Daimler disagreed. Completely. Inside his head, something else was happening. Daimler did not see a factory engine. He saw a machine that could go anywhere. On a boat, on a carriage, on a bicycle, through the air. He wanted a small, light, fast engine that could be mounted on anything that moved. Otto did not understand him. Otto thought transportation was a distraction from the real market, which was industrial. The two men clashed. Daimler was stubborn, loud, and relentless. Otto was equally stubborn and controlled the company. The fight lasted for years. In 1880, it ended. Otto fired Daimler. The compensation came in the form of 112 Reserve gold marks of Deutz AG shares, a settlement large enough to fund a small engineering operation. Daimler walked out of Deutz, a wealthy man by middle-class standards, and a furious one. Maybach resigned shortly after and followed him again. In the summer of 1882, at age 48, Daimler bought a large villa in Bad Cannstatt, a town just outside Stuttgart. The house had a greenhouse in the garden. Daimler converted the greenhouse into a workshop. It was here, in a converted glass building behind his own home, that the modern engine was born. The neighbors noticed the noise. Strange bangs and mechanical whirring came from the greenhouse at all hours. Rumors spread through Cannstatt that Daimler and Maybach were forging counterfeit coins inside. The police investigated. They found no counterfeiters. They found two men building something they could not explain to anyone who had not already imagined it. In April 1882, Daimler had signed a formal contract with Maybach. Basic annual salary of 600 marks, a 30 mark share of the business. The partnership was now legal, written, binding. They were going to build engines that moved. The first problem was ignition. Otto's engines at Deutz had used slide valve ignition, clumsy, complicated, too slow for any real increase in engine speed. Maybach began searching for alternatives. He studied hundreds of patent specifications. Eventually, he found a solution in the work of an Englishman named Watson, a hot tube ignition system, a platinum tube running into the combustion chamber heated by an external open flame. The heat in the tube would ignite the fuel-air mixture at the exact moment of compression. It worked at high speeds. Electrical ignition systems of the time were too unreliable and too slow to match it. With Watson's principle solved, Daimler and Maybach began building. The goal was revolutions per minute. Otto's engine ran at 150 to 200 RPM. Daimler wanted 600 RPM. 10 times faster engines meant 10 times lighter engines for the same power output. A lighter engine could go anywhere. That was the whole equation. On December 16, 1883, Daimler patented his first pioneering engine. German patent DRP 28122, still conceived as a stationary unit but built on completely new principles. Hot tube ignition, compressed charge, fast combustion. It was the prototype of everything that followed. In 1884, they took the operating principle and applied it to a new compact unit with a vertical cylinder. Air-cooled, enclosed crankcase, automatic intake valve operated by vacuum pressure, curved groove control for the exhaust valve, invented by Daimler, a floating carburetor designed by Maybach that would, decades later, become standard on every gasoline engine in the world. Daimler looked at the tall, narrow machine with its single upright cylinder and named it the Standuhr, the grandfather clock. It looked like an old pendulum clock standing on end. On April 3, 1885, Daimler filed the patent, German patent DRP 34926. The grandfather clock engine, single-cylinder four-stroke, displacement of 264 cubic centimeters, output of 0, 5 horsepower at 600 RPM, later pushed to 700 RPM, and then to 900 RPM. Weight around 60 kilograms, standing 76 centimeters tall. Compared to modern engines, it was primitive. Compared to anything else in 1885, it was impossible. Otto's engine at Deutz could not break 200 RPM. Daimler's could run at 900. At those speeds, the same combustion produced several times more power per kilogram of machine. A human being could now hold in his hands an engine small enough to fit on a bicycle that produced enough power to actually move. That was not a metaphor. In November 1885, Daimler took a smaller version of the grandfather clock engine and mounted it inside a wooden two-wheeler frame with two outrigger stabilizing wheels. He called it the Reitwagen, the riding car. Patent 36423, filed as a vehicle with gas or petroleum drive machine. On November 18, 1885, Daimler's 17-year-old son, Paul, climbed onto the wooden frame, started the hot tube ignition, and rode the Reitwagen 3 kilometers along the banks of the Neckar River from Cannstatt to Untertürkheim. He reached a top speed of 12 kilometers per hour. Halfway through the ride, the seat caught fire. The hot tube ignition was positioned directly underneath it. Paul slapped out the flames and kept going. Think about that for a moment. A 17-year-old boy, sitting on a wooden frame held together with iron brackets and leather straps between two small wooden training wheels, above an open flame, heating a platinum tube with a gasoline tank mounted inches from his knees, bouncing along a dirt road next to a river, while his seat was literally on fire. That was the first ride. That was how the modern world of motorized transport began. A teenager, a fire, and a stubborn refusal to stop. The Reitwagen was the world's first motorcycle, the first vehicle of any kind to move under the power of an internal combustion gasoline engine. Neither Daimler nor Maybach considered the motorcycle to be the goal. It was a test bed. The engine was not yet powerful enough for a full-sized carriage, and the two-wheeler gave them a way to prove the concept. Once the test was complete, they moved on. On March 8, 1886, Daimler and Maybach secretly purchased a four-seater stagecoach made by the firm of Wilhelm Wimpf and Sohn. They told the neighbors it was a birthday gift from Mrs. Daimler. They hauled the coach into the Cannstatt workshop and installed a larger version of the grandfather clock engine, 462 cubic centimeters, producing one horsepower. Belts transmitted the engine's power to the rear wheels. They tested it on the road to Untertürkheim, the same road where Paul had ridden the Reitwagen 4 months earlier. The coach reached 16 kilometers per hour, 10 miles per hour on a four-wheeled carriage that moved without a horse. The first four-wheeled vehicle in history to do so. This is where the 4,000 years ended, not in a single moment, not on a single day. But on that road to Untertürkheim, in the spring of 1886, when a wooden carriage pulled itself down the path that had been designed for horses to pull the same carriage for 1,200 years. 60 miles away, in Mannheim, an engineer named Karl Benz was building his own automobile at almost the exact same time. Benz patented his Motorwagen on January 29, 1886, a few weeks before Daimler's coach made its first run. The two men were working on the same problem in the same country, 60 miles apart, and they had never met. Daimler and Benz would not meet in person for many years. When they finally did cross paths in a patent lawsuit years later, they still did not speak to each other. Two German engineers, independently in the same year, had killed the horse as a vehicle. Daimler kept going. If the grandfather clock engine could power a motorcycle and a stagecoach, there was no reason it could not power anything that moved. In 1886, he mounted a version of the engine inside a 5-meter wooden boat and took it onto the Neckar River. The boat, named after the river, reached 6 knots, about 11 kilometers per hour, the world's first motorboat. For the next several years, boat engines became Daimler's main source of revenue. The automobile market did not yet exist. Nobody knew what to do with a horseless carriage. But ship captains and private boat owners understood immediately. A small, reliable engine that could push a hull through water without coal and without a boiler the size of a cottage. That was a business. Boats paid the bills while Daimler and Maybach kept building the future. By 1887, they were licensing their first patents abroad. Maybach represented the company at the Paris World Exposition in 1889. In June 1887, Daimler bought 2 903 square meters of land in the Seelberg Hills of Cannstatt because the mayor of Cannstatt had complained about the noise from his workshop. He built a new factory on Ludwig Route 67. They employed 23 people. Daimler managed the business. Maybach ran the design department. In 1889, they designed their first automobile from scratch, not adapted from a stagecoach. It had a steel wheel frame, a 4-speed gearbox, and a 2-cylinder V engine. They launched it publicly in Paris in October 1889. The French engineering world took notice. Daimler's licenses began to spread. The foundations of the modern car industry were being laid in Paris, Stuttgart, Cannstatt, and a dozen workshops around Europe, all using Daimler engines or their derivatives. In November 1890, Daimler formalized his business into a joint stock company. The Daimler Motorengesellschaft, DMG for short, the Daimler Motor Corporation. He founded it with 2 wealthy partners, Max von Duttenhofer and Wilhelm Lorenz, with quiet financial backing from the banker Kilian Steiner of the Württembergische Vereinsbank. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. It became the most miserable decade of Daimler's life. Duttenhofer and Lorenz had not invested in DMG to build automobiles. They had invested to manufacture stationary engines. Boats were acceptable. Factory engines were the real business. Cars were a dangerous fantasy. The contract modalities they offered to Maybach as technical director were unacceptable to him. On February 11, 1891, Wilhelm Maybach, who had followed Gottlieb Daimler for 27 years through Karlsruhe, Deutz, and Cannstatt, resigned from the company Daimler had just founded. Maybach left, but he did not stop working. Daimler set him up in a private design office at Maybach's home in Cannstatt. In autumn 1892, Daimler funded the rental of the disused ballroom of the former Hotel Hermann, where Maybach and a small team of 12 workers and 5 apprentices worked in secret. Daimler secretly siphoned funds from DMG to pay for Maybach's parallel operation. The patents that came out of this work were registered in Maybach's name alone to protect them from Duttenhofer and Lorenz. Inside DMG, Daimler fought with his own board. The conflict was constant. In 1892, Daimler, age 58, collapsed from heart trouble. His doctors ordered him to Florence, Italy, for rest. In Florence, he met Lena Hartmann, a widow 22 years younger than him, the owner of the hotel where he was staying. They married on July 8, 1893, and honeymooned at the Chicago World's Fair. When Daimler returned from Chicago, he tried to buy enough DMG shares to regain control of his own company. He failed. Duttenhofer forced him into an ultimatum: sell all your shares or personally pay DMG's debts. Daimler sold his shares and his patents and resigned from the company that carried his name. The founder was out. The investors had won. The company began to collapse almost immediately. DMG's stationary engine business was not keeping up with its costs. Without Daimler's patents and without Maybach's designs, the engineering work slowed to nothing. In 1895, a British industrialist named Frederick Richard Sims stepped in. Sims wanted to license Maybach's Phoenix engine, an inline two-cylinder that Maybach had quietly developed inside the Hotel Herman ballroom. Sims offered DMG 300,000 marks, on one condition: Daimler and Maybach had to return to the company first. Duttenhofer had no choice. On November 8, 1895, Wilhelm Maybach was appointed technical director of DMG. Daimler received back his 178 shares, roughly 8% of the capital, plus 5% of annual profits. The founder returned. In history's first international automobile race, held in 1894 from Paris to Rouen, 15 of the roughly 100 cars that started actually reached the finish line. Every single one of them used a Daimler engine. Everyone. In the years that followed, DMG produced a V-twin engine, a 4-cylinder engine, a 4-speed gearbox, a modern spray carburetor invented by Maybach, an automobile with a front-mounted engine, the blueprint of almost every car built since. In 1897, the tube-based radiator. In 1899, a 4-stroke engine designed for Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin's airship. In 1900, the honeycomb radiator, patented by Maybach, the design still used in vehicles today. Daimler's heart problems continued. In March 1897, he had taken over as chairman of the DMG Supervisory Board. For 3 years, he led the company through its final technical transformation. His last major appearance was on a long, rough drive through bad weather in 1899. His health broke afterward and never recovered. On March 6, 1900, 11 days before his 66th birthday, Gottlieb Daimler died in Cannstatt from heart disease. His tombstone carried the words, Das Beste oder nichts, the best or nothing at all. He did not live to see the first Mercedes. On November 22, 1900, 8 months after Daimler's death, DMG completed the first Mercedes 35 HP in Cannstatt, built to the specifications of a wealthy Austrian diplomat named Emil Jelinek, and named after Jelinek's 10-year-old daughter Mercedes. The car set a new standard for performance, handling, and design. It was the first true automobile, as we understand the category today. Daimler's son Paul, the boy who had ridden the first motorcycle in 1885, helped lead the engineering team. Maybach led the design. Wilhelm Maybach stayed at DMG until 1907, then resigned over continuing conflicts with the board. In 1909, together with his son Karl, he founded Maybach Motorenbau GmbH, which built the engines for Zeppelin airships, and later for some of the most luxurious cars of the 20th century. Maybach died on December 29, 1929, at 83 years old, and was buried beside Daimler in the Kirchhof Cemetery in Cannstatt. The two men who had built the modern engine together in a converted greenhouse lay next to each other under the same soil. On June 28, 1926, 26 years after Daimler's death, the Daimler Motorengesellschaft merged with Benz and CA, the company founded by Karl Benz in Mannheim. The two oldest automobile manufacturers in the world became one. The new company was called Daimler-Benz AG. The product line carried the name Mercedes-Benz, combining Jelinek's daughter's name with the Mannheim engineer Daimler had never spoken to. From that moment forward, Mercedes-Benz became the public face of an engine that had started inside a glass workshop behind a villa in Bad Cannstatt in 1882. This is the end of the story of what Gottlieb Daimler built. It is not the end of what Gottlieb Daimler changed. Go back to the road to Untertürkheim in the spring of 1886. Imagine what the road looked like before the Daimler coach drove down it. For 3,000 years, on roads exactly like this one, horses had pulled every wheeled vehicle that mattered: armies, kings, post, goods, farms. In 1886, there was no road in the world built for anything else. There was no petrol station, there was no mechanic, there was no tire shop, no spare parts catalog, no automobile insurance, no traffic law. There was no category called driver. There was only horse, carriage, coachman, stable, and hay. 40 years later, by 1926, when DMG merged with Benz, every one of those words had either changed or disappeared. Horses were still alive, of course. They still worked on farms and mines and cavalry regiments in rural communities across the world. But the horse had stopped being the frame of the future. The frame of the future was built around the gasoline engine. Roads were paved for tires, cities were rebuilt for cars, economies reorganized around fuel, not fodder. Professions that had existed since Rome, ostler, blacksmith, coachman, harness maker, collapsed within a single generation. Professions that had never existed, mechanic, driver, fuel pump operator, auto parts dealer, automotive engineer, exploded into being. In New York City, the transition happened in about 25 years. In 1900, there were still more than 100,000 working horses in the city. By 1920, that number had fallen by more than half. By 1930, horses were a rarity on Manhattan streets. The manure mountains were gone. The flies were gone. The dead horses were gone. In their place stood filling stations, automobile dealerships, parking lots, and traffic signals. The city that had been built around the horse for 250 years was rebuilt around the engine in 25. The same transition happened in London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Moscow, Tokyo, Buenos Aires, and every major city on the planet. Not uniformly, not at the same speed, but inevitably. Wherever the automobile arrived in quantity, the horse infrastructure collapsed behind it. Stables became garages. Blacksmiths retrained as mechanics or closed their shops. Coach builders became auto body shops or disappeared. The harness making industry, which had employed tens of thousands of skilled craftsmen in the 19th century, was extinct by 1940, except as a niche trade for hobbyists and farmers. The horse did not lose a war. The horse lost a framework, and the man who did it was the son of a baker, born in a small Swabian town, trained as a gunsmith at 14, educated in a polytechnic he could not have afforded if his grades had been any lower, humiliated by his own board of directors, forced out of his own company, pulled back in by a British investor, dead at 65 of a broken heart and broken lungs, buried before he ever saw the car that carried his name. It is tempting to think that machines like the gasoline engine are invented by governments, or by corporate research divisions, or by large collaborative teams. None of that is what happened in Cannstatt. Two men built the first high-speed internal combustion engine in a glass workshop behind a private house, funded by shares from the company that had fired them, fighting the neighbors, the police, the weather, and eventually their own investors. They had no government contract. They had no university laboratory. They had an idea that had refused to leave them alone. The idea was not complicated. A horse is an animal. An animal gets tired. An animal dies. An animal eats what is grown locally, which limits where it can go. A machine does none of that. A machine runs until you turn it off. A machine eats liquid you can carry in a can. A machine has no opinion about the terrain. A machine will go exactly as far and as fast as you tell it to, until something inside it breaks. Then you fix the broken thing, and the machine goes again. If that idea is correct, then horses are a temporary solution to the problem of moving. A very long temporary solution, 4,000 years of temporary. But still temporary. Daimler saw that. He did not discover it. He insisted on it. He refused to accept that horses were the ceiling. He stayed with the idea for 18 years between the day he left Deutz and the day he died. He paid for it with his health. He paid for it with his marriage to a company that did not understand him. He paid for it with the humiliation of being forced out of DMG by men who could not see what he could see. He did not live to drive a Mercedes. He did not live to see the horse disappear from European cities. He did not live to see the assembly lines of Detroit, the highways of America, the Autobahn, the interstate, the gas station chain, the road trip, the car radio, the drive-in, the family vacation, the suburb, the traffic jam, the climate consequences, any of the civilizational shifts that his engine made possible. What he saw was a wooden stagecoach driving itself down a road in Untertürkheim at 10 miles per hour in March of 1886. That was enough. That was the proof. 4,000 years of horse travel did not end with a government program or a corporate research budget. It ended with a fired engineer, his loyal designer, a converted greenhouse, and a single idea that refused to stop being correct. The son of a baker from Schorndorf did that. And every time a car starts in the morning, anywhere on Earth, somewhere inside that engine is a trace of the grandfather clock engine patented in Cannstatt on April 3rd, 1885. 4 strokes. Compression, ignition, exhaust. A pattern that runs at thousands of revolutions per minute in every country, in every climate, at every hour of every day. Gottlieb Daimler died alone in his sleep on a cold March morning in 1900. His company had been taken from him once and given back to him once. His best friend and partner would outlive him by 29 years. His sons would continue the work. His name would eventually sit on the hood of the most recognizable luxury vehicle in the world. But none of that is the real inheritance. The real inheritance is that for 40 centuries, the fastest thing a human being could own was an animal. After Daimler, that was no longer true. It would never be true again. The ceiling had been broken in a garden shed behind a house in Bad Cannstatt by a man who had been told, from the time he was a boy, that the correct career for the son of a baker was either to bake bread or to serve the town as a modest civil servant. He chose neither. He chose the engine. And the engine chose him back. Everything we now take for granted about modern civilization rests, somewhere, on the foundation laid in that greenhouse workshop. The truck that delivers food to the grocery store, the ambulance that carries the sick to the hospital, the school bus, the fire engine, the family car. the motorcycle, the airplane, whose first engines traced their design directly back to Daimler and Maybach's work. The boat, the tractor, the military jeep, the delivery van, the mobile crane, the emergency generator. Every internal combustion engine that has ever burned a drop of gasoline anywhere on the planet owes something to the four-stroke design refined in Cannstatt between 1882 and 1885. This is not hyperbole. It is industrial lineage. The patent numbers still exist in the German archives. The drawings still exist in the Mercedes-Benz Museum. The grandfather clock engine itself, preserved from 1885, still stands inside a glass case in Stuttgart, where visitors can walk up to it and see the upright cylinder, the flywheels, the carburetor Maybach designed, the exhaust valve control Daimler invented, a small, silent, tall machine that looks, even now, a little bit like a pendulum clock, the object that broke 4,000 years of horse travel. The horse, after 4,000 years, finally met something it could not outrun,